Thank you for joining us. Well, some years ago, I was part of a fact-checking organization back in 2016 when we started talking about AI and how we could use AI for fact-checking. It was also the moment when misinformation and disinformation started to be like this huge wave that we didn't know what would happen at that moment, but we knew that there was something that was moving fast, really, really fast. And sometimes all our efforts, especially when doing fact checking and trying to work for a better quality of the public debate, when we were struggling a little bit. So, but now it's December 2024. This year was called the election year because basically it was the record for elections held throughout the world. And I know, like 1 year ago, we would read all these articles and reports about how AI was going to impact the news ecosystem and how we should be prepared and all the terrible things that will happen with AI and misinformation. I'm really interested in knowing how this fantastic team of panelists have found this year and finally all these predictions, if they became true or not. But yeah, again, they are the stars here, so I will just introduce them really quickly. Emmanuel Chenze here, he is the COO of Uncensored. For those who don't know, Uncensored is a Nairobi-based investigative media house, and is focused on transparency, accountability, and truth. And they are known for their in-depth investigative reporting. And Emmanuel and his team, they employ a wide range of methods, including AI-driven tools to address disinformation challenges across Africa. And then we also have Tai Nalon. She is the co-founder and executive director of Aos Fatos. Aos Fatos is one of Brazil's foremost fact-checking organizations, and Tai's work emphasizes the uses of AI to track and counter misinformation, particularly around politics. But also, like her team, they've been navigating the complex balance between algorithm-driven insights and human editorial standards for a while, because they've been using technological tools and innovation to do like some amazing stuff already. And we also have Rakesh Dubbudu. He's a founder of Factly. Factly is based in India, so and they are also focusing on transparency and media literacy. They use also data-driven journalism and AI tools to combat misinformation. And they are also doing some really interesting public education efforts to spot misinformation and empowering audiences. And I think that this is like we have like a huge sample of how fact-checking and news organizations that are working in this field are trying to battle misinformation, not only with tools, but data literacy. And again, so just to start with, I would like just for all of you to introduce your work very briefly and tell us, okay, how are right now AI tools specifically transforming your fact-checking and your processes, specifically in this regional context? I think that Tai can go first.
Sure, yes. Well, I think that, the impact of AI in the Global South is something a bit challenging, because we always think of the Global South as something that is quite uniform, but it isn't. We have challenges that can start from language. For instance, Brazil has a secondary language in the continent. We speak Portuguese. So if we are talking about large language models, for instance, we will have some advantage in comparison with the Spanish-speaking world or the English-speaking world or other places, like, I don't know, the French-speaking world, probably, perhaps also. So we have this cultural gap, let's put this way, that might enable us creative solutions, but also can make us have to work harder to develop solutions that in the global north, in the English-speaking world, and other places they excel more, and it's more affordable or less energy consuming to develop technology. So that there's that. We have some language barriers and everything. Brazil is a middle income country, so it's not that bad from a standpoint that it's completely unaffordable to, for instance, pay for data processing. But at the same time, we don't have access to the same level of investments of cutting edge technology for us to develop our tools. So these are basically two examples that might differ from country to country, because Brazil has 200 million people. There are other places that are quite small and wouldn't have access. So I guess that this gives kind of nuance of how we can navigate so differently in a very challenging environment already.
Those are really interesting points. And I guess Rakesh, coming from India, can have something to say.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I kind of agree with Tai. So India has 1.4 billion people, so 7 times the population of Brazil. But we grapple with similar problems, much more culturally diverse, language diversity, etc. So most of the AI work that you see is primarily in English, whether it is the large language models, whether it is a lot of solutions that are built for the world. We understand why it is so, because a lot of development happens in that language. So one of the biggest challenges for the global south, I believe, I speak primarily for India, but maybe valid across the global south, where language and these diversities play a role, is going to be one, as I was saying, these are incredibly expensive solutions. So these don't come cheap. So access to them is going to be critical. So for any organization to even invest in them, forget buildings, forget deploying a solution. So deploying solution will come much later. But you investing a solution at a scale that across the organization people could use is a decision fraught with a lot of investment and money. So these two things I think, are the primary challenges. Once we find some kind of workable solutions to these, I think we'll see a lot more adoption and a lot more even competing with the global north on the AI front.
Thank you, Rakesh. And Emmanuel, how was your experience in Africa? Or how does it look like?
So our experience closely mirrors what Rakesh just said, because we do have a huge language barrier. Yes, there's a widespread use of AI tools right now, especially in journalism, but also even outside journalism, and especially with the rise of generative AI. So there's widespread usage, but a lot of that is still limited to English. I'm in Kenya, and here in Kenya and the whole of East Africa, Kiswahili is widely spoken, but you find a lot of the tools are very limited because they're from the West generally and the global North. So Kiswahili integration is not central to it. For instance, Google's Bard, which has been widely accessible to Kenyans and has rebranded recently to Gemini, has embraced Kiswahili to some extent, but that's more like a translation. You lose nuance, you lose a lot of stuff in the translation. So, and that's only Kiswahili, which is widely spoken. There are lots of other vernacular languages and all of that. Those are not covered. So primarily you have to just deal with English. In Kenya, we are more English speaking. So while that can be taken, it becomes challenging when you move from the urban areas to the rural areas, when you move to even some other countries. So it's a mixed bag. While there's adoption, yes, but not necessarily in the language that you'd want. So you're forced now to predominantly switch to another language. So that presents a growth opportunities. So the next few years, the tools in the space, what we do, what other players do, are going to be very interesting because there are areas to be covered. And then lastly, of course, the content in it. So there's local context missing in lots of instances. If I'm to get on any of those tools right now, I'll pretty much likely find what I want, but it won't have a local context. And that's a problem. Yeah.
Perfect. I think that we've started like the conversation with some very structural differences and in ways that all these technologies are produced and conceived. I would like now to go specifically to the phenomenon of misinformation and understand specifically how has misinformation or transformed in the past few years, with specifically with the rise of generative AI tools, and in for example in Brazil that we had already there was like a very polarized context if Gen AI tools have been used and what has been its impact.
Well, I think that we have a growing understanding that the Gen AI Armageddon is not happening. But either way, what we know is that Gen AI, either if it is new models of chatbots or new models of generating images and videos, even though they are not exactly persuasive, particularly persuasive, differently from what we used to have like 2-3 years ago, they accelerate the process, right? So it's much more easy for you to actually make false or misleading videos than it was 3-4 years ago. And it's way more easier to spread them, to distribute them among many platforms because of the structure of the internet as well. Because in parallel with the development and the actualization of Gen AI, we have a growing fragmentation of the internet space and the platform space. So platforms have different approaches to Gen AI. If you go to one social media platform, some kinds of generative content might be flagged. They have good systems to flag them, but other don't. So it's not just a problem of having a growing amount of Gen AI content. It's a problem of how to tackle that, how to create common ground rules to tackle that, and efficient tools to make platforms, not only platforms, but publishers that use Gen AI because they want to cut costs, for instance, or editorial parameters. Many news outlets, they don't know yet how to communicate to their audiences if they are using Gen AI or if they are, if it's part of their daily production. So I guess it's a novelty. It's not the Armageddon. It's something that we are trying to navigate either to improve our productivity, but also to understand the landscape. This year, what we saw, we had local elections in Brazil. What we saw was a surge of Gen AI misinformation that was not that different from other years, but were more difficult to tackle because there were many. I mean, they were different. They were easier to make, not easier to mislead. It's not about that. It's just about it's become cheaper and more efficient for you to create your own false narratives.
Thank you, Tai. And what's your take on that, Rakesh? Also, like with elections, I've just last week we had a conversation with some researchers from that had analyzed the India elections, and they saw like how deep. No, it was not about deep fakes, but also like a small amount in comparison of cheap fakes and audio and being used to mislead. But basically, what has been your experience, and specifically how audience interact with that kind of content?
Yeah, so the 2024, we had the federal elections as well as some important state level elections in 2024. So the anticipation was that it would be an apocalypse. I mean, with this deluge, and it didn't happen. But at the same time, what it has shown us is what could be in store for the future. At least Gen AI and AI videos were used mostly in the positive light. They were not used for misinformation. So they were used to recreate videos of people, of leaders who passed away, so on and so forth. But what was very striking, and in the federal elections as well as one of the state elections that happened recently, is audio. So we did see a couple of examples of how audio deep fakes were, AI generated audios were used. Now it becomes all the more difficult. Unlike videos and images, there is no provenance also for audio. So it becomes all the more difficult. While you have tools to test whether it is AI or not, the tools don't agree with each other. So you are looking at a probabilistic solution, and fact checking and addressing misinformation is not a probabilistic solution. It has to be deterministic. You can't just say that, okay, this looks like, that further puts doubts in the minds of the readers. So, but like I said, it gave a sense of what might be in store for the future, especially if technology becomes more cheaper, technology becomes more accessible. I believe, at least in the global south, audio could be the future. Especially with the language complexity that we see. And if AI becomes all the more accessible in the languages that a lot of people speak, audio could be the place rather than video, which is more expensive. In terms of addressing also, I think on the positive side, while all this looks like negative, on the positive side, I think 2024 also gave us a glimpse of the positive aspects, in the sense, especially for addressing misinformation. So every major event like elections or disasters or war, we see a lot of old misinformation being recirculated, and I'm sure it's true with every country, and it's much more true with India as well. So we at least at Factly, for instance, we were part of a coalition of a large number of publishers and fact checkers called Project Shakti, and the Misinformation Combat Alliance, which is a industry body of fact checkers in India. So we built a Chrome browser extension tool that could at least help in misinformation that was already debunked. And we did see that this definitely helped. In our case, we use it, our team uses it internally every day, and this really helps them speed up their work. So the sense I'm getting is, one, while we saw a taste of what could be in store in terms of the negative impact, we also saw a glimpse of the positive aspects, in the sense if you can build the right databases, if you can make it more context specific, and if you can find the right use cases, I think there is much to gain from AI, while there is also much to lose. That has been our experience.
I think that it's very, it's key that we can also see, especially, again, we are working and trying to be more efficient, but at the same time, taking care of everything that fact-checking and journalism means in terms of accuracy and trust from our audiences. So, and Emmanuel, I would also like to understand if you see or you perceive any good opportunities in that sense. Again, like when thinking about how audiences are getting their information and the kind of potential threats that they could face.
So some in the audience might know, some might not, but there were some widespread protests in mid this year in Kenya, triggered by the passage of the finance bill by the country's legislature. So what happened in that context was both good and bad. The good was to understand this bill that people are rejecting, that had them come out on the streets. Young savvy Kenyans came up, just used the open bits of ChatGPT to create the custom GPTs. So we had one called Finance GPT. So you could just go to it, you ask it anything about the Finance Bill 2024, and it will tell you. And it's so widespread usage, it peaked essentially. Others now followed up, because there were a couple of other not so popular but also controversial bills that were being passed by the House at that time. the same. We had several custom GPTs. And for most Kenyans, it was their first introduction to Gen AI. ChatGPT has been around for a bit since, I think, end of 2021, thereabout. There have been power users in the country and all of that, but the mainstream usage tables swinged at that point, and it was a big deal. People are just amazed. You could just go and get all the information. They say this bill does this, does it do? And then you just run the query, you get it. That's the positive. The negative was such that we had AI generated images saying things that were really not happening. And you'd come on social media, you go on X and find a trending topic. And when you click through, it's just full of AI generated images. Some of them have even been put on news cards to look like they legitimately came from media outlets in the country, popular ones like kenyans.co.ke, The Star, The Standard, Nation, and the like. So on one hand, you had the useful use cases where the public, the Kenyan public, is being informed about what's going on, in this case in a civic sense. And on the other hand, you had proper disinformation campaigns, because I'd hesitate to call them misinformation campaigns. They were triggered by something. There was an invisible hand somewhere, so they were proper disinformation campaigns, and they were regular, and they were designed to achieve something sinister. So Kenya is going into the elections. We are not just having elections sooner, but in 2027 we should be an election year, and it should be the first time we are having elections with such kind of widespread usage of AI, generative and otherwise. And at least from my end, I shudder to think how that will be. We've had previous elections in 2017 and 2022, and as a newsroom, we prepared for those, how we are going to debunk all the misinformation going on. Now AI presents an opportunity as well as a challenge. In our newsroom, we get to use AI to assist in some of the fact-checking alongside every other tool that we use. But now, with the daily advances and all of these happening, the next 3 years present a very interesting challenge, because there's what Kenyans on social media were calling aura for aura. The government was running its own disinformation campaigns, so the young people there decided we can also run our own misinformation campaigns. That's the tag for the aura for aura. So if you are a journalist or if you're a fact checker, it's a fact checker's nightmare. Because there's all too much and you can't even control. And then in Kenya, WhatsApp has popular usage. So while we can be on X and we are the loudest, on WhatsApp is where the elderly segment of the population is, the parents, and they think everything that they see is the gospel truth. And WhatsApp is dark social. You can't even track how far something has gone. So it's almost, there's an opportunity, big one, in terms of education, civic education, some of the things basically the media does alongside entertaining, the information bit, but also the misinformation, disinformation is just a huge challenge. And for the next few years, those of us in the space and in the industry have to figure out interesting ways of being able to counter that. Might not be able to do everything, but at least get the truth in front before the fake news and everything comes ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Yeah, and well, I'm talking about, some tools that you've been building. For example, Tai, again, I mean, like trying to think about how do you balance efficiency and accuracy in any of AI-powered tools? I mean, like, because can fact checkers use just any tool? Is there something else that fact checkers need to do? And how do you solve that kind of challenges or debates or perhaps conversations within your organizations and your different stakeholders when trying to incorporate AI to improve your work? I don't know, Tai, if
Sure, it's a challenge, right? I think that we are discussing, Anna, you talked about your work at Chequeado, and we've been discussing what we didn't call AI tools. It was called automation, but it's basically, it's a rebranding perhaps, because it's actually an updated version of what's something that we used to do, right? One of the life-changing, let's put this way, tool that Aos Fatos developed in 2020, it launched in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic was Radar, which was an algorithm to predict disinformation campaigns. It was groundbreaking because we didn't have the capacity until that time to gather a large amount of data from social media platforms and understand what was going on simultaneously on such platforms, for us to understand if there was a disinformation campaign going on regarding, at that time, the pandemic, anti-vaccine narratives, denialism, and other things that we knew that happened at that time and that still have consequences until this day. At that time, the platforms, they were open, their APIs were accessible, they were more transparent regarding what was going on inside them. So it was a different time. We were able to develop such tools. The internet was more open. We had a deeper understanding of what was going on inside those platforms, which now we don't have. So what we had developed until that time was a basic knowledge of how we should understand what disinformation campaigns are and how to tackle them. Now we already know what are the patterns, the common patterns, like the common language patterns, the keywords, the basic concept of those narratives. And with, for instance, large language models currently, with the database that Aos Fatos has gathered, with those data and the fact-checking content that we have, and the investigations that we have built, we have a huge amount of data that helps us to give context to the most relevant disinformation narratives. And with large language models, we can use our database to tackle the most asked questions regarding disinformation, because many of them, they don't change. They basically change the focus, or they change the main character that's behind those narratives. But most of the times they always have a center of meaning and way to approach subjects that we have already covered. With such an AI tools that we are developing now, we have a chatbot, LLM-based chatbot, that only uses Aos Fatos database to answer our audience, minimizing the chances of hallucination, for instance, minimizing the chance of providing false or misleading information instead of accurate fact check, for instance. We all have this knowledge that has been absorbed because of our experience understanding the broader landscape. So yeah, we with the database we have, with the fact-checking database that we have, which is really valuable, it is a long-term coverage of an already long-term phenomenon that is disinformation. We are perfectly capable to develop tools that are accurate, that are ethically concerned, that are grounded in facts, and actually to create a benchmark to advise platforms that want to develop their chatbots that it is possible to develop tools that are accurate and are fact-based. So I think we have a case. I think that we have actually the best case, because we know how to handle sources, we know how to handle facts, and we know how to fact-check them. So I think that we are at our best capacity to tackle such challenges, because they are ethical challenges. They are not technological challenges only. And if we pay attention to the human dimension and the ethical dimension to everything that we do, I think that we might have a good solution for the challenges that we are facing.
That's very interesting. I mean, like, specifically talking about the platforms and how because also in many senses, as like fact-checking organizations, they've been always working on these platforms, and perhaps they fall behind sometimes involuntarily, because basically platforms change, and perhaps you've been investing a lot of a lot of, for example, the money, time, efforts in designing tools that sometimes they just they are useless after some things change, for example, APIs and that kind of things. But I also like what you mentioned about the databases and how the fact checking, at least, or like these kind of organizations, they produce a lot of data and information and content that can be used by anyone, and you've been working collaboratively in many senses. For example, Rakesh, I would like to ask you about how do you perceive collaboration between fact-checking organizations, or organizations that try to use AI tools to combat misinformation in any ways, and if there's anything else that should be done in terms of having these most relevant conversations with these stakeholders that perhaps may have something to do about the situation.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I believe collaborations are definitely important, partly because, like I said, we all go back to diversity, and because of the inherent diversity, we bring so much diverse experience. So, diverse experience and diverse data in that sense, so to speak, because technology and AI technology works in data. So I think collaborations are going to become the key. But I would also like to say, even on the ethical consideration side, I think we have a three-pronged test. One, three parameters. One, that, for instance, is the solution that you're building, is it an aid or a decision maker? Is it aiding you make a decision, or is it a decision maker by itself? I think that's a very question that most of us need to answer. Secondly, I think the biggest challenge is going to be choosing the right set of use cases. Not all use cases are amenable or useful for AI. The third is the landscape is changing very fast. So what is true today may not be true 3 months later in terms of ability. So these three things in mind, and I'll go with what Tai was saying about databases. I think databases are going to be the critical, especially in the media landscape, because they are the arsenal that we have. But unfortunately, these are very expensive to build. They're not so, which is why collaborations become important, and they bring those diverse experiences. In fact, I'll give you an example. So a couple of days ago, our team was so we received a claim where a leader was making, it looked a very old video, maybe 20 years, 25 years ago, he was in the video, it was looking like he was making a remark against a certain community, and that was a claim. Now, for us to go find out which year, when, and what, it would have taken hours, if not days, to find out. But fortunately, we had this database of parliamentary debate transcripts in our internal. So we in a matter of minutes, we were able to find that this was a speech made in 1998, which is 26 years ago. And we found the transcript, then we found the video, then we found, okay, the claim is obviously it's a clipped video. Now, I'm just trying to tell you, this is the power of databases. And now, traditional fact checking, would you not have found it? We could have, but the difference would have been maybe a few days, or even so those few hours and few days of freed up time you could address more claims. So was that the right use case? So I did not, for example, the team did not use AI to say this is true or false right away, but the team used AI to use it as part of a workflow. So that is when I say so it aided us make a decision, it did not make a decision by itself. So I think those are the key, and even at Factly, that is what we do. So we are not building tools that can directly make decisions for itself, and we don't believe AI will be at that scale, and which is why it's important to keep that in mind, whoever is building such solutions. So focus on databases. If you want to collaborate and build databases, that is great, especially in large countries with a lot of publishers. But please remember, the generic models are only going to help you so far, and they will be very, very generic use cases. And for you to really make a lot of headway, it will be those specific databases that are going to radically transform what you're doing.
Thank you, Rakesh. And we're in the last minutes of this conversation. So please, if anyone has any question, we have a box for questions. So you can always ask. I'm gonna just ask my last question to Emmanuel before we go to that. And talking about audiences, if there's any extra effort that you as an organization need to do in terms of educating or helping, or perhaps like having honest conversations with your audiences about how you're using AI and how it's assisting you, and perhaps when there's perhaps sometimes some fear about its potential impact.
So one of the things that we've struggled with at Uncensored has been how to effectively integrate the usage of quote unquote AI, because a lot of these tools are the ones that are just recently rebranding. AI is the hot thing, so everyone is rebranding their thing to say AI. So while we've been using a number of tools for fact checking, there's been the newcomers, especially with Gen AI. You can just make a few prompts and get a nice image and share. So we've been very slow to adopt AI in our newsroom, and we are taking a very calculated approach because there are so many issues. Number one, this is journalism we are talking about, so they are bound to be ethical issues. These needs to be responsible disclosures to the audience every other time you use certain tools, for instance. So we've used a lot of these tools for experimentation in-house, because eventually we are a small team, but we also a big team at the same time when it comes to implementation. So there needs to be a guiding policy so that when everyone else is using AI in any of our production in the newsroom, there are guidelines that guide them. To what extent can you do? This is creative work. So there are also copyright issues. Are we infringing on anyone's work and all of those things? So we've been experimenting internally, but the output outside has been almost zero because we need to have a proper framework. While we want to be progressive and on the cutting edge of technology, at the same time, we also have a duty to the audience, to our readers, our viewers, and everyone to be responsible, to make sure everything is at the level of expectation, matches that. Essentially, how we view AI is like a complementary tool, something that already helps us augment the kind of work that we've been doing. So over like the next year, we're looking to be able to bring to the public some of what we've been doing internally. For instance, we have a publicly listed corruption tracking website, for instance. The data that's displayed there, when you go there now, it's called WikiLeaks, you'll see a nice analysis of some of the work that we've been doing. That analysis is from data that we've pulled, analyzed, cleaned, verified, because that could result in lawsuits if you make false claims. And then we've published authoritative. All that work has been manual. So we are looking at it, AI as something that can help us with the data collection, some of the analysis, and maybe creating the visuals, so the graphs and all of those. That's the match that we are going. And when we output any of that work to the public, as it is right now, part of the policy that we're developing is we'll make declarations that this bit generated by AI and so on. That's how we are thinking about it. So public facing, we've not had any of our work so far become AI, but internally we've been testing how this can help us with transcription. For instance, we are a very, very video heavy media organization. So there's a lot of transcription going on. How can AI help that? But of course, I discussed the language barrier issue earlier. So when you have story subjects and characters who are speaking in Swahili or vernacular languages, the AI tools that are available are going to throw a fit. So we'll run into issues. So that means we're going to stay a lot longer in that testing phase for that bit. But on the other bit, we do daily fact checking. Some of those things, if you need a nice featured image, what can you get? We Africans, black skin tones, AI has had lots of issues with that. So it means our in-house graphics designer still has to do his job. We can't rely on a lot of the generated images. They're still not getting a lot of the things right. These tools will get better as the days go by, but those present immediate challenges right now. But the short of it is, at least from our point, from African Censor's point, is where we deploy the use of AI, we will be very open to the audience and make the necessary disclosures. That's how we see it in the short term. Chances are AI usage is going to be so prevalent, these conversations will like they never happened. But as it is now, we need to have that distinction, and it's the kind of advice that we'd also pass on to others in our space. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I think we only have 2 minutes for 3 minutes for questions. And there are a couple of questions here, and they're very interesting about, for example, if you believe that high-profile cases like the Elliot Higgins high AI-generated Trump arrest images have impacted the public trust in journalism also in your regions. I would add, and specifically in which stages of your fact-checking workflow you think that Gen AI is most beneficial or less effective as well. I don't know if perhaps who wants to answer, like very briefly.
I'll want to take the second one, Anna.
Yeah,
So I
of
think
course.
one of the things people need to determine is, especially on the workflow side, is to understand which parts of the workflow can benefit from the probabilistic nature of AI and the deterministic nature of AI. So for instance, you've written a piece and you want somebody to just, copy check it, spellings, grammar, etc. You're not looking at some deterministic kind of solution. You're looking at just a probabilistic, and generic LLM will work. But to build, for instance, you want to cross-check some data, cross-check some specific piece of information, though their probabilistic nature is not going to work. You need very, very specific answer to a question. Even there, again, AI would work, but provided you have the right databases. We keep going back to databases. I think research is one part, research. Once you write, converting that, and obviously claim management in terms of what is going viral, even those parts AI can be helpful. In fact, converting a lot of your fact checks into video, I think AI is going to be a great tool in the future. With Google planning to launch Google Vids, I think this is going to become all the more easy. So the key is, there is no perfect answer. I think it changes from org to org. But the most important part is not to get bogged down by, or get overwhelmed by what is available. So I think break it into chunks and see where is it really helpful, where is it really saving your time. So it is not going to be a 100-0 solution at any point in time. There are going to be gray areas in between, and it's important to understand those gray areas.
Great, that's super interesting. And well, we have to finish this session. We're on time, but I want to thank you again for joining us.